Zodanga, the Predator City. Moving, devouring, draining Barsoom of energy and life.
A new age arose. The age of the great Predator cities. Predator cities.
A few weeks back we talked about the 2013 Disney blockbuster The Lone Ranger and how it lost over $200 million to become the biggest flop of all time. But like I briefly hinted at in that video, The Lone Ranger is not actually alone in this incredible accomplishment, because just 1 year prior there was another Disney blockbuster movie, John Carter, that also ended up reaching that magical loss limit of $200 million. And by public information, it is the very first movie in history to have ever done so. As to why John Carter ended up putting Disney so badly in the red, there's a big bunch of business reasons separate from the quality of the product itself. They gave a budget of around $300 million to a movie based on a book that apparently was big in the early 1900s. Then they didn't use the title of that book or even a variation of it to convey its main concept, but just the overly generic name of the main character. The whole concept itself is all about spending time in a drab, empty desert where everything looks the same. It didn't have any stars, the trailers gave no clear picture of what it even was, and overall, movies about predator cities for some reason just don't seem to perform so well. That said, I still believe all that business stuff can be overcome with quality. If a movie is really good, really entertaining, it can, and often with enough marketing spending will, do well. But the issue is that John Carter is not that, but instead the one thing a big movie hoping to make money cannot be. John Carter is boring. John Carter is boring. And that's not to say there is no good entertaining stuff in here, there is. Once the movie kicks into gear, it is pretty great actually. But for most of the runtime, the movie is less in gear and more trying to locate the shift stick. Despite all its positives, John Carter the movie overall comes off as a very dull and tiresome experience to get through. It's only 2 hours long, and yet by the end of it you feel like you've been sitting there for an eternity. And that's not the type of film that makes audiences show up. But instead of me just saying this movie is boring, let's actually dig deeper into it to find out why that is, what the reasons behind that feeling of boredom are. Interestingly, a lot of it is quite similar to the factors behind the Lone Ranger's downfall, but only in much different context. So, if you want to make a big dull movie to also reach that magical loss limit of $200 million, here's some useful tips to help you achieve that. The first big reason that makes John Carter the movie feel like a very tiring experience is the fact that it has some serious beginning issues. But whereas the issue with The Lone Ranger was that it was way too slow to properly begin, here that issue is that the movie is not necessarily too fast to begin, but more so that it begins too many times in too little time. At the very start, we open with a 3-minute visit to Mars, and we don't really get into character or plot or anything like that here. It's basically just voiceover exposition mixed with some visuals of stuff just randomly happening. But to be fair, it is meant as a, at this point, separate prologue to establish where most of this movie will take place, so totally fine. After that, we finally move to our main hero, John Carter, and the movie seems to actually begin. Carter is trying to lose a shadowy pursuer as he's taking this mysterious message to the telegram office. And it is pretty effective. We start to build character with actions, we start to build a semblance of plot, we start to build tension. It's starting to feel like a very interesting beginning.
Mr. Burroughs, Noah Dalton, your uncle's attorney, my deepest sympathies.
Huh?
His death came as a shock to all of us.
Wait, what? Okay, so then it turns out that the telegram section is not actually our real beginning either, but instead just another short prologue to bridge us into the POV of another character, Carter's nephew, who shows up to inherit his fortunes as we hear that he has suddenly mysteriously died, despite us being with him like a few seconds ago. But since this movie isn't about John Carter's nephew, it quickly becomes clear that this nephew section isn't the real beginning of the story either, but instead yet another prologue used as a framing device to tell it when the nephew finds Carter's journal, which finally takes us to the real beginning. And so to summarize, in the first 10 minutes we've had 4 beginnings. We start with a prologue on Mars, from which we go to another prologue, which bridges us to another prologue, which is used as a framing device to tell the story of the movie. And why is this an issue? Well, first off, it completely destroys the pacing of the opening and makes it into the equivalent of a car ride that's constantly jerking to a stop over and over again, to the point where even though it's been only 10 minutes, you already feel like your hair is turning gray and just wanna get off. But more importantly, it denies the audience the chance to get invested in the movie. See, every time we hop from a separate opening to another, the movie essentially resets. All the character work, all the semblance of plot, all the tension and emotional connection,
it's rewind time.
it all has to be built up again. And by the time we get to the real beginning, we've already been through a whole lot, and yet we feel like we've achieved nothing. We don't know who Carter is as a person here. We don't know what he wants or why. We know nothing, because we've only just begun, and all those tiny brief things we saw before do not matter here. We've done so much without actually having done anything, which is the thing that makes the first 10 minutes feel pointless and thus boring.
Essentially, we can never establish an emotional anchor into the story through a specific character point of view because we are already hopping to the next.
If I'm still not being clear, there's a very good example of this on a scene level when Carter is confronted by some cavalry men who plan to take him to their general. For maybe the first time, this is starting to seem like a real proper scene. There's confrontation, there's obstacles, there's tension that we're starting to build up. But then this keeps happening.
I suggest you come peaceably.
Do you now? Welcome to the 7th Cavalry of the United States.
Company under your command nearly turned the tide.
Every time Carter tries to escape and the movie cuts away, the scene essentially starts over, meaning that all the tension, all the emotion, all of it resets. We see things happening, but that's ultimately all it is, things just happening. We do get a pretty good glimpse into Carter as a stubborn fighter, but we never get invested in the actual scene, because we aren't given enough time to do so, because it's constantly climaxing and starting over. And the same mentality applies to the first 10 minutes. These aren't full individual scenes that stand on their own and organically build up to the next, but instead just brief fleeting moments that mostly aren't even required for what comes next to function. If you don't want to cut out the Mars prologue, fine, but at least cut out the first Carter prologue and instead open with the nephew arriving with the telegram. Because the more times you jump around resetting things and teaching us that what we see doesn't carry any unquestionable meaning to what follows and isn't something we should get invested in or care about, the more likely we are to not care about the rest of your movie. The next big boredom issue here comes in the form of our main hero, John Carter, who is one of the dullest, most forgettable big blockbuster movie heroes in existence, which is due to the 3 narrative attributes he's constructed with: who he is, what he does, and why he does it. First of all, Carter is the most uninteresting type of hero possible. He's a passive hero. We've already talked about this before multiple times, but what it essentially means is that he's not a character who actively pushes the plot forward with his own actions, but instead someone who gets pushed forward by the plot. In other words, throughout this movie, Carter is an idle passenger who just gets dragged around by either other people or circumstance.
I suggest you come peaceably.
Do you now?
Sort this out right now. Come along.
Take me hostage.
What?
No! No! The white imbecile has taken my sword!
And as I've said before, characters who get moved instead of moving aren't interesting, especially when it's supposed to be this big action hero. John Carter isn't exactly a great title, but it is much more compelling than John Cartered around by others. This leads us to the second attribute, which is the fact that Carter doesn't really do anything in this movie. See, the central story here is all about the civil war between the 2 nations of Mars, which is meant as a metaphor for the US Civil War that Carter took part garden, as well as a subsequent fight against the Indians. And when Carter gets inadvertently dropped right in the middle of it all, he has pretty much no interest in it whatsoever. He has no dog in this war, he has no goals or objectives relating to this war. Overall, he doesn't want to take any part in this war.
I'm not for hire. I've got a cave of gold of my own, somewhere.
So then, why is he our hero in the middle of it all? Why is this movie called John Carter if John Carter isn't interested in being part of its central story?
And yes, I understand this movie is about Carter finding a cause, but he still needs to be doing something meaningful in that 90-minute space before he finds that cause as well.
I mean, the only action he does that makes people even notice his existence is that he's good at jumping.
Sock, Sock.
Where did you learn to jump that way?
You will jump, Virginia.
Jump for me.
The one who jumps? Jump. See what he's capable.
I guess you could argue that Carter's goal throughout the movie is to get back to Earth, and that's a fair argument. The only problem is that because of all the hopping and restarting in the opening, the movie never had time to establish a reason for him to actually get back to Earth. From what we've seen, he has nothing back home. So what is it he's getting back to? I guess he wants to get back so that he can go find the treasure he's been looking for, but again, we still have no clue why he needs to find that treasure in the first place. The ultimate reason for finding it is so that he can use that treasure to get back to Mars at the end, but as for a reason why he needs to get back to Earth to find it, there is none.
I knew now what the cave of gold must be used for.
Which is why his whole journey of getting back to Earth doesn't have any stakes or power, and mainly is just pointless and boring. And this leads us to the third attribute where, even though toward the end Carter finally gets a clear established active goal for a clear established reason, this reason is never made strong enough to be compelling. Basically, he finds out that the Princess of Mars is about to be executed in her wedding, and that's why he goes to fight for her and the nation she's part of. But the issue is that the movie never bothered to back this motivation up in any way. It's not like there's some long evolving romance between these two. It's not like he has learned that she and her people are good and the other side is evil or something. The entire basis for his affection and actions for her seems to be that it's because he's a guy and she's a hot humanoid woman. And even though that's maybe realistic, it's not very cinematically involving.
She's a human.
And it is all a bummer, because there's so much you could have done with this character. For example, you could have made this whole movie be about his blind hatred of Indians who killed his family. Have Carter fight the alien Indians or something because he sees killing them as a way to get revenge on the Earth Indians that killed his wife and child back home, only for him to ultimately realize that there's more to people than just their race or whatever. Instead of just suddenly adding another tribe of wild alien Indians that pop in out of nowhere just to get massacred by Carter in 2 minutes. All in all, you could have done something where this character has clear, strong, active goals and motivations that make him interesting and compelling for more than just 2 minutes. In addition to just the opening and the main hero, the same boredom problem affects pretty much everything that happens in this movie, because pretty much everything that happens in this movie is insignificant, because the movie never properly establishes any reasons for us to think otherwise. For example, the whole central story of the civil war between the nations. The reason the movie gives us to care about it is because the evil leader of the other nation is forcing the princess to marry him to bring peace between them. But it's like, why is that such a big deal? The evil leader hasn't ever been established to be specifically evil or a bad husband for her. Just the opposite, it mostly seems like he really wants to do right by her. So then what's so bad about her marrying him? Why can't she just marry him? Why should we have any investment or interest in stopping that marriage? You know, other than just because she says she doesn't wanna.
I didn't run away! I escaped!
From what? His breath? So marry the guy and save your people.
A life of oppression that's not living!
Princess who didn't want to get married. That all there is to the story?
The same mentality applies to all other aspects about this central story. We don't know why the nations are at war, other than because the movie just says that they are equally powerful and that the other nation apparently mines resources from the ground, which is killing the planet, which we never actually see being the case. We don't know why the evil leader would suddenly even want to marry the princess, other than because the movie just says that's what's happening now.
He's already on his way here.
We find out much later it's because the bold alien god is telling him to do so that he can use the wedding as a trap, but again, we don't know why the bold alien god wants him to go through all that hassle in the first place when he could easily just kill her and her people with his god gun right away. The movie never clearly establishes or backs this stuff up, but instead just says that's how things are when the time comes and expects us to take it to heart based only on that. And it's the same with everything else in this movie. Character motivations, subplots, individual events, all of it. There's this whole backstory motivation where the bold alien gods apparently get life force from planets being destroyed or something, but again we never actually see a scene where this would be the case and instead just hear him briefly mention it.
So what is your cause? We have none.
I don't understand. History will follow the course we have set, Earthman.
We don't cause the destruction of a world, Captain Carter. We simply manage it. Feed off it, if you like.
I don't understand.
There's Carter's main goal of getting back to Earth, which, despite us knowing of no reasons for him to need to get back, we are meant to think is a big deal. But again, there's no scene where Carter realizes he's stuck in here, no scene where he agonizes over getting back to Earth. The only thing we do see is him excitedly jumping away from the teleporter that brought him here. There's a big subplot side trip where Carter and friends set out to find some mystical place that can show them how to use the teleporter so that Carter can get back home. But once again, the movie has never established that Carter doesn't know how to use the teleporter in the first place. They just decide to go find that place before he's even gotten the teleporter back. It's implied that he can't use it, of course, but we still need to see an actual scene of Carter stealing the teleporter back and realizing that he can't use it. Because if you don't first establish the importance of learning to use the teleporter, what's so important about finding the place that can teach to use it? It's like going on a journey to find an answer to a question that hasn't been asked. Kinda pointless. And the whole trip itself, there's no scene where heroes seem like they can't ever find the mystical place or that the place might not even exist. No obstacles that are ever introduced. They just set out to find the place and then they find it. How super duper interesting and important feeling. I could keep going, but I'm sure you get what I'm going for. If you don't first clearly establish the importance of what's going on, we're not gonna care about what's going on. And if we don't care about what's going on, it's all just gonna come off as pointless and boring. If you're trying to feed us something you want us to value and enjoy, you first have to make us realize we're hungry for that something. Because if you just force something down our throat solely on the basis that this is what's happening now, that's not how you get people to want what you offer. That's not how you get a movie people will wanna watch. That's how you get John Carter. That's how you get this.